So our recording is started. So we're going to talk about the quiz. We had a bunch of people answer it, which I appreciate. We've had another busy week of meetings and programs, keeping up with everyone. And so this is a pretty easy one. So IPM stands for what? Integrated pest management. I tried to make this pretty obvious with some of the other answers. So, yes, the mad peony markers, man, they're mad today. So it is. It's integrated pest management where we're using the different tools. So whether we're using barriers, crop rotations, mulches, we're using season extenders. We are using specific plants in the right place. We're preparing our soil. All those pieces are tools in the toolbox for IPM. So using a pesticide is the first step of control in IPM. False. It is the last. That is what the idea is. We go to the pesticide at the end unless we are in such an overwhelmed state that other practices are too little too late. And then we have to go to the pesticide, which means we are using what we call a rescue treatment. So we are trying to rescue the problem at the end. So things kind of got out of hand before we got there. So, and sometimes that happens. I'm not saying never use pesticides, but let's try to integrate some of the other tools in the toolbox so we don't have to rely on that pesticide unless, break in the case of emergency, if that makes sense. The next question, some IPM strategies include crop rotation, right plant, right place, barriers and exclusion, or all of them?
All of them.
All of them. Those are all three great different practices. So you can use any one of them. The best thing is to use the right tool or the right practice in the right situation. So IPM, we probably need to say right tool, right situation, right? So it's using the right tool out of the toolbox. Use the screwdriver instead of the hammer. So the next question is blank is watching, observing for any insect, disease, or environmental damage in a crop or a landscape. That's your scouting. And we scout in fields, we scout in gardens, we scout in lawns, we can scout in multiple venues. So we definitely will scout. The next question is a re-entry level is a time period that needs to pass after applying a pesticide that has been applied and is safe for humans or animals to re-enter the treated area. That is true. And that is on what? Where do we find it?
The label.
We find her on the label. So, and we get questions whether people have lost the label and they need to know when the reentry level is or the dilution rate, if it's a concentrate. I am happy to look up that label, find out what it is, and find that information and get that to you. So we do have cases where the label goes missing or it gets damaged from seepage or spillage or something like that. The extension offices have the ability to find those labels and get the correct information out. So if you run into someone that has that type of situation or you have that situation personally, let the extension office know. We will get that label to you and help give you guidance on that. So we're happy to do that. We have a lot of those cases. Correctly using correct personal protective equipment before, during, and after a pesticide application reduces the ability for a pesticide to be absorbed through the skin, injected, or breathed in. That is true. So correctly using the correct type of PPE, because there are different forms of PPE and we need to use the right one in the right context. Especially when we're talking about gloves, whether they need to be single disposal or whether they need to be rubber gloves. So in that case, if it says rubber gloves, you need to be wearing rubber gloves. And that's why I said correctly using the correct equipment. Maybe that's a little bit tongue-tied, but we need to use the right equipment in the right scenario.
David, was that supposed to be skin instead of skill?
Yes, that is supposed to be skin. I apologize.
Okay, thank you. That's okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, it was supposed to be skin. And dermal or skin absorption is the worst one. That is the most common one, is that we see people out not wearing, sometimes not even wearing a shirt, barely wearing gym shorts and flip-flops, and that's about it. Spraying and no coverage at all, just barely none. And one of the things, we talked about eating and going to the bathroom. If you have that residue on your hands, that can still, if you're using the wrong type of glove, for instance, that can still go into your hands. And if you are eating or going to the bathroom, guess where your hands are going? And that's a big area for exposure. That's very tender tissue and absorbs very quickly. So our hands may be calloused and pretty rough, but if you go down to, going to do the bathroom or in your mouth, that tissue is very tender and absorbs very easy. So thank you. I apologize for that. The pesticide is a legal document in the state of Nebraska that master gardeners must follow when applying personally or giving recommendations. That is true. It is a legal document. So whether you are doing the application at home on your own or you're recommending, it is a legal document that you are required to follow all the time. And then the next one is list an IPM strategy that you personally used in the past to reduce the need for pesticide. And I left that one open. I decided to do a short answer. So I wanted to see what kind of answers that you came up with. So I'm going to go to our response bar and go down through here and look at the list that you all sent me. So we got 34 responses. We had barriers, crop rotations, hand pull weeds, identify, you had the pests, nematodes, planting the marigolds, rotating plants, crop rotations, a lot of good answers here. So I appreciate all your responses. So that's good because we want to get you kind of thinking on those lines of things that you can do ahead, that if you do ahead and you plan ahead, then you can avoid some other problems down the road, or in the bad case, using that rescue treatment at the very end. So the rescue treatment is a tool, and I don't want to diminish that tool in the toolbox. Sometimes you just have to use it, and it's okay to use it, not a problem. Just know that if you have the ability to do some things to avoid using that, that's ideal. So the suffix "side" means to kill. So we have a pesticide, meaning it's killing a pest. A herbicide is to kill a plant. A rodenticide is to kill a rodent. A algicide is to kill algae. A fungicide is to kill a fungal problem. So you get the idea. Side is to kill. And pesticide is the overall umbrella term that we use. So that's where pesticide, rodenticide, herbicide, all those fall under that umbrella. So being observant in the growth and the development of a garden and landscape over time is one of the best IPM strategies a gardener can use. It's true. Watching, scouting, paying attention before things get out of control. That's absolutely true. And then that helps you decide, okay, so next year, or maybe I pull this up and move it somewhere else. What am I going to do following up to avoid that problem in the future? Maybe it be I just pull out this problem and get rid of it, or maybe I'm going to plant something different in this spot next year. Or maybe I'm going to get a soil test and drop my soil pH down. Those are all strategies. Blank is used to determine when to treat some type of damage on plant material. That's your damage threshold. That's telling us if it's time to do the treatment. That's when you have 8 grubs in a square foot of turf. That's when you need to do, that's an example of a damage threshold. It's time to treat. There's also what we call an economic threshold. We will hear about economic thresholds primarily in crops where you have a problem, a disease, or something that's a problem or an insect, and it makes economic sense to do a treatment. Sometimes the crop stand or the crop quality is poor enough, it's not worth spending the money to get rid of it because you're going to lose money in the process. So that's something that the economic threshold is. When's the break even? When is the loss great enough to justify doing some type of treatment? So you'll hear about economic threshold and damage threshold quite a bit in Western Nebraska and South Dakota. So anyway, so that is your quiz from last week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back out into Google. Since Google Classroom is on a different account, I have to switch accounts to a different Google. Did anyone have a chance to go through the handouts, the 2 publications, or the videos? Did, anyone in the background in the room got to watch any of them? Okay, so
I did the videos.
If you want to share something that you noticed from the material, anyone want to share online or in the classroom?
Can you send out the mushroom key?
I did not send out the mushroom key, but I could. I sure could. That was Kyle Broderick talking. That's, and I should have that somewhere. So
that might be kind of fun to try to ID a few.
We do have to be careful when identifying mushrooms because they are a potentially toxic depending on what we are doing. Officially is to identify, get the pictures, get samples. You can send a fungus sample to campus to be identified because we are very skittish about master gardeners doing diagnosis and doing diagnosis incorrectly or identification incorrectly. And then someone gets sick from saying, oh, it's safe to eat or not. So
don't worry, I never eat them because I think they're gross.
Yes, and the running joke with Rock and some of the specialists in the past was the first fungus will be the last one you eat. You know, the first one that you eat may be your last. So that's telling you be very, very careful. So, but it's a good thing internally to look at and externally when we're working with clientele to recommend people to go to. And I will send that out as well. So I will send you the key and also the information on identifying those pieces. So, okay, so we're going to scroll down. We are skipping turf grasses in a different location in the schedule. So we are going to go up here and do this first. Anything else that you have had questions on or things that you noticed on diseases from your readings? Okay. Would you like to take a 10-minute break? Well,
No.
this is kind of a good, what's that? Would it be okay to take a 10-minute break? Then we will resume and do your games, and then we can be out with class a little quicker tonight. Would that be okay? Okay,
Sure.
Let's take a 10-minute bathroom break, coffee break, and then we will get started here again. And then we'll do some more share or open mic with any questions that you may have about the program or resources, since we do have a little bit more free time. I do hope that you will go and look through those videos, watch the videos, because this one's very video heavy. So watch those and you'll get to catch up. We do have some people coming in late, so thankfully we're going to catch them on the guts of the program. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we will resume doing the games and then any question answer for class. Okay, so 10 minutes. Okay, now we resume video. Comment. I have a concern about pesticides. I have a friend who sprays Tempo on the garden. This person thinks it's safe because they claim it's used in Frito-Lay trucks. I wish I knew how to discourage this use. They have given me the produce before, but I just toss it because I know they have used Tempo. Any ideas how to speak with them to discourage the use of it directly in the garden? And the first question you can ask is it labeled for vegetables? That's your first thing is it labeled for vegetable gardening? And that's a yes or no answer. And if it's a no, then we say, if it's not labeled for vegetable use, then it's not safe for you to put on the crop and ingest. So, and you can say the label is the law, and you can say this is what the Nebraska Department of Agriculture will tell you. That's what the University of Nebraska will tell you. That's what the University of Nebraska Extension will tell you. And that's what, as a master gardener, will tell you. If it's not on the label, you cannot use it legally. And it is not considered safe for human consumption. And that's one of those tough ones, because we do have people that will do that. They will use a pesticide and you know it's not safe, and you just that's your default, where you say if it's not labeled, you do not have to use it. It's not allowed to be used. It's not safe to ingest, and that you need to use a product that is labeled for vegetable crops or any crop, whatever you're using that pesticide on. Is it labeled for what you're trying to treat? And if the answer is no, then that's your answer. No, period. There's no gray area in that. So, legal standpoint, you know, the laws, the label is a legal document. And we have people will say, well, it never hurt me. Well, just because it doesn't hit you over the head with a sledgehammer immediately doesn't mean it's not going to harm you. So we have a lot of work to do to diplomatically explain that going on. Tempo is an insecticide, and we use it to control bagworms in evergreen trees and windbreaks. And it is used in a bunch of different other products. But remember, it's also a product that, you know, like any product, can be very potent. And when applied wrong, could have some bad residual effects on a product or equipment. So that's why we have to be so careful. But I do have naysayers. I have naysayers that will call. I had one lady call last year absolutely furious at her husband because he brought something in off the farm into town on the garden to use, and it was not. It was old. It was broken down. The label said $1.69. And so it was well past its use. It was diazinon, and diazinon was used on vegetables at one time, but that has been taken off for well over 20 years. It's been found not safe for human consumption in vegetables. So she was mad. She said, I was going to fix him a nice supper, but you know what? He's going to end up with a ham sandwich after this. So, and she just decided, fine, that's the end of that. And he didn't understand why that was a problem. It's just that pesticides change, the classification changes, the label changes, what they find out over time, whether it's safe or not to use changes, because over time we find out side effects, or we find out residue problems, or things like that. So anything publication, even with a NAB guide, has to be updated every minimum 5 years on a NEB guide. That's just standard with the University of Nebraska, is that if it's old, it needs to be updated. And if, like our chemical weed guide that we have, that is updated every year. That is a listing of all the chemicals that we use in pesticide training. That is a big spiral bound notebook that you do pay for, and that is updated every year. So the guesswork is taken out for the homeowner, the rancher, the farmer. So that's important to remember. Any other things online, anything that you thought about online while we were on our break that you would like to share or have questions about? Because if you have a question about something, I'm sure there'll be someone else in our group that's thinking the same thing. So I want you to feel comfortable in asking those questions.
I was wondering about like my annual zinnias. I have it's kind of the same area I use, and I usually put zinnias and bachelor buttons in there. I haven't seen any disease issues, but I've only had them in there like 3 years. Down the road, am I going to have to switch that out, or do you think that's not really an issue?
Zinnias are not so much of a problem. They're pretty easy to do. That's not so much the problem with those. So you can get away with that. You know, the garden, the vegetable garden, our classic example is the tomato, pepper, potato, and eggplant family. That one's a bad one when it comes to people wanting to plant over and over and over in the same spot. That's when we got to rotate around. There are some other bedding plants that should be rotated, and I can share a list with that if you would like, things that need to be rotated. Zinnias are pretty tame, and of course they're going to drop, and so they volunteer quite a bit. So you can get lots of wonderful volunteer seeds, and they'll reseed themselves if you allow them to. So that's a fun one. I was looking at fun zinnia seeds today, looking around shopping and looking at the different colors, and they're so easy to have and so bright. So not a problem with those guys.
The bumblebees love them.
Yes, and bumblebees are a great pollinator. They are a better pollinator quality-wise than a honeybee. Are a much more efficient pollinator, which we'll talk about that with beneficial insects. Because we always talk about the honeybee because that's the one that gets the attraction, that gets the media attention. But I tell you, our bumbles are really important creatures in the landscape. So that's a good one to talk about. And if you know it attracts bumbles, maybe you want to put it in different places in the landscape as long as it's in the right growing spot. So right plant, right place. If you want to move your insects around with a flowering plant, that's an example of, okay, I got another really nice, well-drained, sunny spot where I can plant zinnias. If I want to attract them to move around, that's one thing you can do. You can move the plant material and entice your beneficials to move with it. Okay, so I'm going to drop down the chat here, and I'm going to do our examples. So let's do this one first. This is our matching. We can do matching or we can do Jeopardy. Maybe let's do Jeopardy first. Let's do our Jeopardy. Okay. Damage caused as a result of an immediate action. or an event within an environment, such as wind damage to a plant. And you can unmute your mic and yell the name out.
Abiotic.
Abiotic.
That's our abiotic disorder. So that can be the wind damage, that can be the heat off the building, that can be. Now that's damage caused. Oh, I read it wrong. I apologize. Damage caused as a result is injury, but it is an abiotic disorder. So it is an abiotic disorder, but it is injury. So we will talk about leaf scorch, for example, from hot wind, and we will see that on shade trees quite a bit. So what happens is people will talk about that, and they think it's a chemical problem when it really is an abiotic problem. So that happens, and it is injury. Okay, I will do a better job reading. A plant's reaction, such as wilt or blight, as an indication of a disease.
Symptom.
Okay, so we got sign and we got symptom. So, you know, knock it down to the 2. So what do you think? Is it a sign or is it a symptom?
It's a sign.
Symptom. And that can be kind of tricky. And that's the reason why we discussed that. It is tricky. It's the reaction is the symptom. And then, and people tend to use that interchangeably. So understand it's the plant's reaction, which is the wilt or the blight. So sometimes that's not terribly clear.
We're not doing very good now.
I know, but you know what? You learn from your mistakes, right?
Yep.
Well, that's
Okay.
what I always said.
It's not necessarily true, but it is what they say.
A tumor-like growth that can develop in response to an insect laying eggs within a plant.
Gotta be
Those
gold.
are galls, yeah. Got it, yay, so we're back on the 0 now. Okay, a pathogen or its parts that is capable of causing an infection and disease when transferred to the appropriate host and environment. So think about the chickenpox parties that they used to have years ago.
No, heaven forbid you.
That I was old enough, I was in the generation that got chickenpox. And my wife was sent to a chickenpox party to just get the chickenpox and be done with it. So my sister-in-law and my sister and my mother-in-law got it too. So it's a little bit, that was a worse thing years ago for adults to get chickenpox, but they went and had a party and they got they all 3 of them came back with chickenpox. Okay, the level or degree to which something is poisonous.
Toxicity.
And they will talk about a lethal dose in half the population, like an LD50, or what's the lethal dose or the level of toxic. So, an indication of a disease given by an observable presence of a pathogen or its parts. So remember we had symptoms. So this is your sign. Got it. So I let you guys throw me the answers. I answer it, and then if it's wrong, then we discuss it. So it's a sign here. It's the indication of a disease given by the observable presence. So that's the observable presence is the sign. The reaction is the symptom. So remember the reaction of the plant or the host is the symptom, and the indication of the disease by what you see is the sign. Okay, a disorder in the structure or function of a living organism, such as a person, animal, or plant. Okay, great. 3 factors needed for a disease to develop: a host, a pathogen, and an appropriate environment.
Disease
Yep.
triangle.
And when the pieces in the triangle overlap, that's when you get it. So, it has to have all 3 of those pieces interacting together. It's kind of like all the stars have to align up. So think about something like that. You got these 3 pieces, the host, the pathogen, and the environment, as pieces of an equilateral triangle, equal weight. And as they converge on each other, that's when you get the problem. A microscopic organism that infects and lives off other organisms.
Virus.
That's what we're thinking. Yep, it is. And that's something, viruses do not leave a plant. Once you get a virus in the plant, the only way you get rid of it is basically destroying the plant. And sometimes we have injected viruses in to see the reaction of a plant, to see how well it reacted to something. And whether there's an economic threshold to get rid of it. But for a gardening plant, so think of how many of you have had coneflowers that have this really weird distorted growth?
Yep.
That's called Aspergillus, and that is a viral problem that's spread through virus. So that's an insect feeding. So there's nothing you can do about it. You can't fix that plant. You just, either you've got to live with it or destroy it. But remember, you've got an infected plant that the insect, your vector, is going to, take plant juice out of that plant and then spread it potentially. So always beware.
You don't want that in your compost pile either?
No, I would just trash that one. I just get rid of it if it's a virus. And I know people have had like daylilies and peonies and or daylilies and iris. Sorry, not peonies. Daylilies and iris tend to get viruses, and so they that's a tough one, because especially if it's a prize color. So some people will keep them just because they love them. An organism that is capable of being infected by a pathogen and exhibiting symptoms of a disease. That is your host, right? So we got host was saying that. Our group was saying that, and I heard that a couple different places. A type of disorder caused by some factor other than a living organism. So something other, we messed that up on the first question. That's abiotic. Got it. A person who studies diseases.
Pathologist.
You bet. A eukaryotic organism that attaches itself to a host and decomposes the organism and absorbs nutrients from it. Yep. We got it right. So think of powdery mildew on the lilacs. That's what that's doing, is it attaches it to the host, and it's one of those annoying things that we've got to do some treatment with. And so a lot of times with our lilacs, which tend to get overgrown because there's a lack of airflow, what is a strategy that you could do to a lilac to reduce the potential for powdery mildew in the future?
What does eukaryotic mean?
Yes, you can thin them out. You can thin them out, and that's awesome, because that is what type of strategy is that? What is it, a tool in the IPM belt? Yes, it
Yes.
is. You bet. So instead of using a fungicide on an overgrown lilac, next year you can trim it, or after it blooms, up to 2 weeks after it blooms, then you can trim that lilac back and create more airflow, which would reduce the potential for the fungus to the powdery mildew to return. So there's a good long example of IPM right there. So there's an IPM strategy. Instead of reaching for the fungicide, we trim that out, doing it correctly with the correct procedure going on. Next one, microscopic unicellular organism that reproduces asexually, some of which cause disease. Bacteria. Okay, and that is, so we talk about bacteria. We have good bacteria also. We have good bacteria that is used in food processing. So if you've ever had sauerkraut, you've had a product that has been broken down with the bacteria at the fermenting process. Think about cheese. Your cheese, a lot of cheese types are fermented. So fermentation can be good, and through working with bacteria. Okay, a type of disorder caused by a living organism. Biotic, absolutely. It's a biological agent that's doing the problem. So would a gall be, would that be a biotic problem since it's a living thing? Yep. Does the gall necessarily harm the plant for the most part? A lot of them are more unsightly for our galls. But we did a class specifically on galls a couple years ago because people will get those questions. It'll get your attention. People will say, well, what is this? They'll send you a picture. They'll send you a branch of something. And so maybe that'd be a fun class to know, what is this gall? What does it look like? What does it do? Would that be of interest to the group?
Yeah.
Because we will get that question in the extension office and master gardeners will get it. I think we've had enough years past to talk about that one. Okay, a modified root of a parasitic plant that anchors itself into vascular tissue of a host plant.
The Hostorium?
Yeah. So there you go. So it's okay to miss, you guys throw out the answers, we answer it, we may. If it's wrong, then we're going to talk about, how we got to that answer and how to explain its way through. So no, that's good. Those are easy pieces to discuss, and it's kind of fun to do it with a group and have a few laughs about it and then talk about some examples. So if you have examples of something that fits under these two, whether you're here in the classroom with me or if you're online, just yell it out.
Dave?
Yes.
If I could be a little helpful on symptom and sign, using the human body, an elevated temperature would be a symptom. An insect bite in the skin would be a sign. It's evidence of a causative happening that causes a symptom in the host. So
that's how the body would react.
The word evidence would relate to sign, and then the reaction to the evidence would be the symptom, like an elevated temperature.
That's what's important, because we talk about that and we tend to jumble them together when there are two different things. And so always remember those little helpful tricks to make a difference. And that's why we like to ask questions of everyone. And if you have a good way to explain it, throw it out. That's why we're here online and in class to share. So this isn't just David telling you what to do and learning this. Let's learn together and talk, because We all have lots of good ideas and information to share from our experiences that make the program better. So thank you for sharing, and anyone's welcome to do that. Okay, so we've done our Jeopardy, and so let's see what this is. These are flashcards, so you can look at these. I can send you the code if you want. So here's some examples. We're going to go backwards. I'm going to show you some common examples here. Or maybe I should just stop and we'll just look at them. And how about that? Would that work? Okay, so this is apple scab. Okay, now we're back to the tomatoes. So we're back to our tomato here. Picture from Clemson University. Sunken spot, circular. We will see this every once in a while.
Looks like modern art.
Anthracnose from bacteria moving on the plant. This can be spread by overhead watering. That can happen where you have a lot of bacteria on the plant material itself, and rain or splashing in humidity, where you have to have a humid environment and it splashes on and it sets in, and that bacteria comes in and starts to do the damage. So here's another one, the apple, and it's got this brown stuff, which we showed. We talk about apple scab. Oh, David, I have to click on this side. That is apple scab. We will see scab on our apples here, and that is fungicide that's used to treat scab. One of the common compounds is Captan, for instance. Also, good pruning technique and increasing airflow also is the IPM treatment, the IPM tool to reduce scab. But when we're fighting scab, when we have fruit on the tree, it's not time to prune. It's not the ideal time to prune. So, you know, remember the right time and the right treatment. So here's another one. And that is black spot. That's the concentric ring. So you'll see the concentric ring and the yellow surrounding. Once again, this is something that, you know, if you're doing your mulching, you're avoiding overhead watering, that will help reduce some of that problem. And in humid growing environments, that happens kind of easy. Where we live in a more arid environment where our humidity is lower, not as prevalent, but we will have humid years. We will have humid growing seasons. We will have a stretch of humidity that may come that triggers the environment to be correct for something like that to show up, if that makes sense. Okay, here's another one. We see this in the grocery store a lot too.
Mold.
You bet, that's botrytis. It's mold, and this happens really easy on berries. Berries are very soft, they're very tender. They can bruise very easy. And so where there's bruise, and then they're packed in those clamshells or in the little berry boxes, it does not take long for botrytis to set in on an infected fruit. Fruit that is overly ripe will catch it quick as well. That's really soft. So it spreads like wildfire in the box. That's why we tell people when you buy berries, and if you rinse them off, because one of the first things you can do is rinse, but once you rinse, you better eat them because their quality goes down really quick, and they do tend to, quality goes down and also can go to rot quick.
Rinse them?
Yes, rinsing shortens the shelf life on berries. And so that's why they're literally picked and put in those boxes, those clamshell boxes or the little berry boxes, unwashed. So that's why if you're going to eat them, please rinse them. And when you rinse them, eat them quick. They only last a couple days anyway on the food safety side. So if you buy them, eat them, enjoy them, go buy some more. It's a little tougher to save unless you're going to freeze them or you're going to can with them. Here's another one. That's canker, where you get the canker is building up on here. You will see canker in our evergreens, and where there's been some damage from, we would call it mechanical damage. So that's where mower blight or the weed trimmer or things like that would cut open the bark and go into the xylem, and the phloem, and the vascular tissue. So that allows for the canker to get a foothold and establish itself and move on. You bet. We see this guy a lot. Whoops, David. Cedar apple rust. And the cool thing with cedar apple rust from a pathologist standpoint is that cedars and apples antagonize each other. And so the spores off of the apples will be carried by the wind, can be carried up to a couple miles in any direction and land on the cedars, and you get the globs. And the globs, for the most part, if you have a few, they're more visual than anything. Sometimes we can have a really bad infection that can be harmful to our cedars, which we think these are juniper species. We tend to throw cedars around that term very loosely, but it'll infect your junipers, including the eastern red cedar, Rocky Mountain cedar, the different types, and you'll get the globs. On the other hand, you get the spores from the cedars, the juniper species, will end up on the leaves of the apple tree, and you'll see these yellow, rusty colored circles. They start out yellow, then they start turning the leaf more yellow and bigger, darker circles. They can cause severe damage to apples. And it's one of those things, once the leaves drop, we definitely need to rake them up and get rid of them. The treatment time for fungal problems with cedar apple rust on an apple is pink bloom stage. There's a very narrow window of time to treat those. And a lot of times by the time I get pictures or samples of cedar apple rust on the apple in the office or on email, the treatment time has passed. So that's when you got to treat right in that pink bloom stage. So that's one that's very specific.
How long does that usually last?
Week or so. It's not a very long time. So, and of course, we will see quite a few cases where people have an acreage, they will have a windbreak, they will have the cedars as part of the windbreak, and they'll have an apple tree in the yard. And so you know it's going to get infected. So either you're going to be treating at that pink bloom stage, that very narrow week to 2 week time stage, or we're going to be looking at selecting some more resistant varieties of apple that are more resistant to cedar apple rust. Does not mean it's going to cure it. They still can get cedar apple rust, but they are much more resistant to it. So. Okay, so here's another fun critter. David would pay attention. That's crown gall. Yep, there you go. That's one of the galls that we see. And so that's an insect, and they will emerge from that crown. And they'll come out of it. And that's something either you can trim off or you can prune back. That's one strategy. So usually they're unsightly. They definitely will get your attention. You look at that picture, that grabs your attention. So
what kind of insect is that forms that, David?
There's some mites. There's some different types of wasp species that will spread those. that will lay their eggs. And so that's why I wanted to get more in depth on a class with the galls, because they're not all the same. And most are beneficial. There are many of them that are beneficial that are hunting other insects in the ecosystem. So that's why I would like to, or if nothing else, send you out materials so you can do some studying on your own on the galls. But I think it'd be a fun one to talk over. And if you know of any galls or pictures, take pictures or bring in samples, keep samples. We could do a show and tell with galls and talk about them. So that would be a fun one once we get into the growing season.
So you scrape them off, or you just prune them off?
A lot of people will just prune them off. The small ones will just be pruned off. You can scrape them off, especially after the insect emerges out of the gall case itself. We tend to get this every so often out here. Any takers? Fire blight. Apples and pears, ornamental pears, are very susceptible to fire blight. It'll look like a burnt shepherd's crook, like someone took a drip torch to the end of a branch, and it'll look like someone just drip torched it, and it'll curl like a shepherd's hook, if that makes sense. And you will see this every so often on years that are more humid than others, meaning our humidity level is going to be different than other parts in the state. But when our humidity level is higher than normal, or in an orchard where trees have not been pruned and they've been neglected, that tends to show up a little easier. And this is a sanitation one where you have to literally go back. So you see the end, you're going to go back into clean, healthy looking tissue, and you're going to prune back into 6 inches with, where the healthy tissue starts, 6 inches even further to where you have a point where you can prune, and you're going to prune out and you're going to sanitize your pruners each and every cut, so you do not spread fire blight on accident. Because if left not treated, it'll just roll right through the host and cause severe damage, even death.
You get to prune it during growing season?
Yes, you would prune that one during growing season. Yeah, you cannot wait. You got to get it knocked out.
And that's using your Clorox.
You can use Clorox wipes. You can dip it in Clorox bleach solution.
That's the
That's the strategy that works fairly well.
Pruning or sterilizing your pruners.
Yes. And we have a question on the back.
Treat that early.
Yes. Yes, you can. You got to watch it. This is where scouting's important. And so if you start to see it starting to curl a little bit, starting to look a little dark, then problem is we're probably got some fire blight going. So yes, that's where scouting is really important. Early detection, very important. Okay, anyone hazard a guess on this guy? This is mosaic. This is one that we will see. You will see the kind of cool virus pattern in some of these plants. And you will see the streaky virus, the types of viruses that show up in a monocot like your daylilies or your iris, for instance. You'll see, or in the broadleaf, you'll see this mosaic pattern that's quite almost kind of nice. I was like, well, that's cool. It's like, it looks cool, but it's a virus. So this is what we call mosaic virus. It's a cool mosaic pattern. Okay. This is a common one. There's an oak gall. And the oak gall will turn darker color as it dries out. And sometimes you will see a bunch of oak galls together. They will populate. And so sometimes you will get very heavy infestations on twigs or leaves. And so there will be people that will be very upset when they see that. those oak galls. And it's like there's so many of them, and they do tend to crowd. So that's kind of an interesting one to show. Galls are just kind of neat to look at. How many people like watching Dr. Pimple Popper? On that TV show, galls are kind of like watching Dr. Pimple Popper because they're so odd. That is like, wow, that is strange. Like, how are they going to do this? How are they going to remove it? You know, we get kind of get, and there are people that get infatuated with that. So we have people that really get infatuated with galls, and it's a common enough thing. We'll see those types of questions. Yeah, I think we might have an answer right here. We got powdery mildew. And so this is from a lack of airflow or very heavy, dense plant population. Overhead watering will help spread it. We will see in very thick plantings of vegetables or in ornamentals. I saw that change in my own landscape, and I used my lilac as an example for you all. We had a privacy fence put for our backyard. And when we put that in, I started getting powdery mildew in my lilacs because it changed the air pattern and the airflow in the backyard. And so your strategy is then, and they were needing to be pruned. So, you know, once again, once spring comes, I'm gonna blow the powdery mildew over into Miller's next yard. So, no.
Nice neighbor.
Yeah, they can spread, especially you think about neglected grapevines, you can get that so really overgrown. So a lot of dense overgrowth, stuff that hasn't been cleaned up, like apple, you know, your fruit trees, your grapes will do that too. Okay, here's another one. Looks kind of similar, doesn't it? Some ways. So there's another powdery mildew. So it will look different on different things. So we will see powdery mildew on cucurbits, on our vine crops, very commonly. And so it's very tempting to just turn the sprinkler on the melon patch or the cucumbers. That will do that. If you, for instance, if you're mulching and you've got your drip line buried for your, or your soaker hose in your melon patch or your cucumbers, you can reduce the incidence of this by doing that. That would be an IPM strategy of watering at the base of the plant. So here's another one that's kind of interesting. Look at the end. Look here, we're looking, and then something's really kind of shriveled up and looking kind of bad. That's root rot. Flipped it wrong. So when we're thinking of roots, we would like to see nice, healthy, cream, light yellow or white colored roots like this. And we start to see roots that are shriveled, slimy, black, dark tan. That's a sign of root rot. And so we talk about our soils and how we need to amend either a heavy soil so it drains better, that will help, or the type of plant material. Some of them have very fibrous roots. And so we can promote root rot on accident by wrong plant in the wrong soil, or a soil that needs to be amended, or we have watered too much. Those are some things to think about. So we think about yews shrubs. We used to see quite a few of them up against homes built over the years. We still do see quite a few yew shrubs planted up against the sides of houses and buildings. It is very common choice for landscape architects at one time or the general homeowner. As a rule of thumb, yews do not like wet feet. They do not like soggy soil. And what do we have right up against the foundation of a house? We have fill soil from construction, which generally has lots of what in it?
And
A heavy clay soil that doesn't drain well, what happens to the yew over time? rot, and it just gradually will go downhill. And sometimes it takes a longer set of years, but they will do poorly. Smart. Yes, smart. Smart.
Ethical smut.
Yes. This definitely will get people's attention. And so, you know, that's another airflow issue, and treating, you know, scouting the fields, scouting your sweet corn patch, because this really will upset people if their sweet corn has smut. So that's a common one. Most everyone will catch that one out here. And then this one. Guy takers, some type of. Yep, that's a wilt, which can be caused by squash bugs that as they feed, they're transmitting the toxin that causes the wilt, or it could be a soil-borne wilt. We have some soil-borne wilts such as Fusarium that are bad. And so we can look at Verticillium is another one that's in the soil. And so we need to rotate a crop out, or we rotate a crop that is going to be tolerant to that. So we reduce those colonies. We can also go out and we can intentionally select varieties such as tomatoes that are resistant, that have been bred to have some Verticillium or Fusarium resistance bred into them. So if you see vegetables, and I will pick on the tomato because that's a common one, you'll see on the tag, you'll say Roma, say a set of letters such as V or F. That means it has some resistance to Verticillium or Fusarium, for example. Sorry about that, needed a drink. So there's some common examples of the flashcards I wanted to show you tonight. Do we have any questions out there that you would like to talk about? Let's talk about the oak bullet gall, for instance, since we got people's imaginations going.
You have a good book to recommend with, you know, pathogens? There's so many.
Yes. Actually, in the process of cleaning out of my old office and moving to my new office, I found some really good USDA pictures of diseases. And so if I can run that through the scanner, I can scan it and turn it into a PDF file and email it to you. Would you all be interested in that? These are old, good, still photographs like what you saw in your flashcards.
Yes, please.
Yes. Yes.
So that would be kind of handy. I'll show you the pictures because the product, when it comes to treatments, are not okay. So either I copy it and I black out the chemical because it's old, but it'll have good cultural information for IPM. So that would be okay to show you. So here is the oak bullet gall. This is from entomology at UNL. And so look what they form these little bullets here. And a lot of times this one will show up on the stems, on the twigs. And it definitely gets people's attention really quick. So it will talk about some really good information on here. So the egg is inside the twig and inside that gall structure. It is a pale legless grub developed inside the gall. The adult is 2 to 3 millimeters, so not very big, dark brown wasp. This is an example of a wasp that comes out of this one. Rounded abdomen, narrow waist, straight antenna, and has an ovipositor, which would be, the ovipositor is the part that lays the egg. And this is your little guy right here. That is a wasp. That is the adult from the oak bullet gull. That's your critter.
He's not good. He's no good.
Not this guy. They're not a harmful guy. They're not a harmful one. They usually are following something else, another pest. The adults do not feed. Basically, the larvae that are doing the chewing and consume the inside of the gall as they develop. That's where the gall is developed. The larvae come out, they lay eggs, they die, it starts all over again because it basically, the gall is formed and it's got that grub that's feeding inside of that gall. So we see it commonly in Baroque. We will see that across our region, not a problem. So heavy infestations, it really isn't, but it definitely will make people freak out. And so this is one of those, another one, tool in the tool belt is identification. And so send you some goodies, show you some goodies. That's why I kind of do my Friday favorite of, oh, by the way, I ran across this. I want to make sure I share this with you. So that's what's in that Friday favorite is a resource on something I've been thinking about or something that our horticulturalist team or extension's been talking about, or it's a topic that people may ask you about. These are all great things. So think of the Friday favorite as a goodie of resource that I'm sharing with you that you may not know about that you can use to load up in your book. So, and keep around for your information. So one thing I will share for you when we do searches on information is, for instance, I talked about a very specific thing. I wanted to look up oak bullet gall, and I added the term and extension, meaning this will sort out and bring extension resources clear to the top in your search. So this doesn't get Wikipedia. This doesn't get some Jerry Baker off the wall type of resource that is not scientifically researched. What it did is it pulled a credible source from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln right to #1. So if we scroll down, you will find other information. So we got some stuff from Iowa State. We got something from Ohio State. We got something from the University of Minnesota. So there's some information for you. Here's some more information. This is from my colleague, Kathleen Q. She is the educator in Fremont. And so she has an article about the different types of galls. So the ash flower gall, the hackberry nipple gall, or the oak bullet gall. So what she has done is she's added, this is a little article here that she wrote, and she does have a picture of the oak bullet gall in here. But I can pull these resources for you and share, but when you're going to look for a resource, I want you to use the words and extension, tag this in your Google search or whatever, if you're using Yahoo or Google or whatever, use the term and extension and it sorts it out. Sorts it out very quickly for you. So one of the questions and one of the comments we will get is if you cannot find your information in 3 clicks, you usually give up. So that happens a lot with homeowners. That happens a lot with our clientele. So always use this little term and extension as a little trick to pull up information quickly for you. And then you can start to discern whether it's something you want to use. You can also add this and Nebraska extension. So you just made it specifically to Nebraska. If it's something that you really want to focus on that's a Nebraska thing, this will pull up your NEB guides without having to go through the UNL webpage. And I know that's cheating, but it's fairly slick. This is a fairly slick way to get to a publication, a NEB guide, through the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension. type your term, put and Nebraska extension, it'll start pulling up articles from extension here. This is from Lancaster County. So this is written by Sarah Browning, who is my colleague in Lincoln and Lancaster County. Here's the article from the Fremont Tribune that this is the one we just saw from Kathleen Q. So this pulls this, so this starts to sort out information on the web from the University of Nebraska Extension. So when we did this, you had 5 hits, 1, 2, 3, 4 hits before you got to something from Colorado State. So at least if you don't find something from Nebraska that works, that you have a good explanation, and if the information from Colorado State is applicable to our situation, then you can use something from CSU as a good resource for many of us in Western Nebraska, and it's be the same thing in Western South Dakota. So this gives a more general explanation. It does have some information specifically to Colorado, but it's also good to research and look and see. So doing some research, doing some surfing on the web, this is some great stuff. Here's some better pictures of that gall produced in the spring. So there's your gall. And here's an even better picture of your adult wasp. So it's always good to search. And, you know, when we use an out-of-state material, we have to be able to discern, does it fit our conditions and our environment? Or does it have some great piece that we can, you know, we can share a picture. So for instance, if we like this picture, we can right click and we can select our picture. We can save our picture as, or we can take our screenshot. We can save the picture and use it as long as we give proper credit to the source and who it was who wrote the article. So we got into a little bit of searching and citation. Remember, whenever you use an extension resource, you give the title, the institution, and the author. You always give those people credit because we do not want plagiarism in any form in extension. So, any questions? Any other general questions that you would like to talk about? Is there a good way to get rid of apple worms? I don't want to use pesticides if I have to. So that is one of the more interesting topics. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to look. So we're going to, let's look this up. So apple maggots, we also have the codling moth. So we got to know what we're looking for. This is from the University of Minnesota. This is what the apple maggot looks like. This is good information. If you've never seen the adult apple maggot, this is what it looks like. So that's good. And it talks about the life cycle. That life cycle, in this case, is also good for us because that's not going to change. That is something that's very applicable. It will show you the picture here of the maggot. So like that, we can magnify the picture of the maggot on the apple. And then this is what the larva looks like. So one of the first things in IPM is correct ID. We got to know the correct ID so we know what to do. So there's a picture of the apple maggot inside the apple, and it talks about the life cycle of the apple maggot. There's some better pictures. And so it talks about some different strategies. So let's look at these strategies. For instance, this is an IPM right off the bat. This is the sanitation one, picking up and removing any dropped fruit that serves as a place for the maggots to develop and then come out as adults. Talks about putting them in the trash, and do not compost them in your yard. So very specific, good IPM trick. We talk about bagged apples. So that's another thing to think about, but we're talking about controlling a home planting. You can put out sticky traps.
So the contaminated apples are full of chickens?
They shouldn't be. If you haven't put pesticides on them. So someone talked about throwing them out in the chicken pen, letting the chickens eat them up. That'd be fine. So in this case, you could do a trap, a sticky trap to collect them. So they're being caught on the sticky trap, for instance. And here's some examples. You'll also catch other things other than the apple maggot on your sticky traps. So don't be surprised. But there's an example of a sticky trap. And you can magnify this up close. So that's a neat feature. And we're going to go back to opening this up so you can see information. So store-bought large red fresh apples coated with Tanglefoot. That's another non-toxic product that will be a trap. So instead of going on the apples on the tree, you're putting out trap apples for them to be caught in and then compost them at the end of the season. And then we talk about the lad trap, which is this red sphere. Talks about the pieces on trapping. This would be a non-chemical control. This is another one. Kaolin clay is also a non-toxic way of trapping and controlling the apple maggot fly. So here's another example. It's a visible layer to all surfaces to the tree, leaves, and fruit. It acts as a visual and physical repellent. So we have repellents and we have barriers. So that's another IPM. Females are attracted to the red color of ripening apples. So a grayish white apple is not attractive to them. So in this case, they're applying the kaolin clay onto the fruit, and so it's not attracting them. So that's why people get so disgusted. Well, my fruit's just getting ripe and now I got worms. Well, it's because it's attracted to that. So that's another one. And notice how pesticide is clear to the bottom. This publication is designed specifically with IPM in mind, connecting last week's class to this one, where the pesticide's the last one we talk about. So it can talk about, you can use the traps, you can use effective pesticides for apple maggot, such as Epsom valerate, carbaryl, or spinosad. Carbaryl is the chemical name for 7 insecticide, for instance. But when we talk about chemicals, we have to use the active ingredient for the product. One, because there are so many products out there available. They're not available in every hometown locally or even on the web. And 2, as master gardeners, we are trying to avoid promoting one chemical company or one brand name over the other. We're trying to be neutral, that we are not showing any preferential treatment to one product or more concerning one company. So here are your examples of the Epsom valerate. So you need to look on the back of the label, your legal document for control of apple maggot. And this says Epsom valerate, then it would be okay to use as a insecticide for the apple maggot, for instance. Carbaryl is 7. And so once again, you got to look at the label on the product. Spinosad is the same way. So that's, you'll need to clean your traps. You'll have to reapply any Tanglefoot product if you're putting that on the trap. So, we don't accidentally bring some residue on there, spray again, repeat the process, follow the label. It says you may have to do 3 or 4 applications per season. And so you have to usually split that over a 10-day period. So spray, wait 10 to 14 days, spray, wait to 10, 14 days, spray again. So thank you for bringing that question up. So then I could show you when we're to search, finding the right species, looking at it, getting the correct ID, and then these strategies that are IPM, pesticides IPM strategy. It's just the last one. And you notice how we really do try an extension. This is another source from another state that is applicable, that it shows us, notice that pesticide is not right at the top. It forces us to scroll down and read, and that's good. That's good. So I just wanted to show you a living, working example of a question as a master gardener of how to go through this process. And so in some ways, this is better than having you just watching along for a 2-hour video. Let's have an organic discussion applying this. This is the application part. This is the part where you do the searching, the correct ID. Now let's look at, we got the correct ID with the problem. Now what are we going to do? Looking at all the other options. In this case, we found a resource from a state that is very applicable, that is perfectly acceptable. We can use this one, for instance, to answer that question. So, any other questions? In the room or online? Because it's almost 9 o'clock. I try not to keep you any longer than I have to, but I want to talk about that. And so this is what I call a teachable moment. And this is something that, going back in my beginning as an extension agent in 1999, I had a very wizened extension specialist says, you jump on the opportunity to have a teachable moment with your clientele. And so this is so I wanted to share a teachable moment with all of us in the room and online. Some of you already know this, so it's nothing new to you, but it's always good to review this. And so instead of telling you, oh, just go use 7, if you have the time and they're willing to learn, this is a way to kind of walk people through on answering an extension question. And that's something that these modules do not teach you, but I can teach you. So I think some ways, and that way it's a richer learning environment. So thank you to Dr. Roger Stockton in 1999 for telling me as a very green, wet behind the ears, brand new extension agent, Northwest Kansas. So I appreciate the wisdom from all those that helped me get started. And I hope to share those tricks and ideas with you. So anything else tonight? I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to stop recording.